There is something about the wasteland that feels like home. Maybe it is the crunch of ash under your boots, or the way that lonely guitar drifts across a ruined skyline. Maybe it is the weight of 200 years of history pressing down on every crumbled building, every skeleton still seated at a kitchen table, every faded propaganda poster still clinging to a concrete wall. Fallout does not just build a world, it buries stories inside of it, layers deep, and lets you find them at your own pace. So, tonight, settle in. We are going over 200 facts about this legendary series, from the very first lines of code ever written for it, all the way to the glowing streets of a show that put the franchise in front of millions of new eyes. Some of these will feel familiar, others will change the way you see the whole thing. Let's begin. Section 1. The Origins. How the Wasteland was born. Fact 1. Fallout started at a pizza party. That is not a metaphor. In 1994, a programmer named Tim Kaine threw an informal gathering at Interplay Entertainment, the company he worked for. He had been quietly building a game engine in his spare time, something nobody had officially asked him to make. He hung a flyer advertising the get-together, hoping that people interested in building a role-playing game around that engine would show up. About 8 people came. One of them was Leonard Boyarsky. Another was Jason Anderson. Those 3 names, right there, are the seed of everything. Fact 2. Fallout was originally supposed to be a sequel to Wasteland, a 1988 post-apocalyptic game that had been published by Electronic Arts and developed by Interplay. The team wanted to continue that story in that world. EA still owned the Wasteland name and license, and they refused to sell it or allow a sequel, so Interplay had to start fresh. A new setting, a new name, a new universe built from scratch. That forced reinvention turned out to be one of the great creative accidents in gaming history. Fact 3. The game was internally considered a B-tier project at Interplay. The studio had more prestigious, better-funded titles in development at the time. Fallout was not the flagship. Kaine has said in interviews that this low-priority status actually gave the team enormous freedom because nobody senior was looking over their shoulders constantly. The game was allowed to become strange and specific and deeply itself because the people with the most power to meddle had bigger fish to fry. Fact 4. The original plan was to license the GURPS system, which stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System, a pen-and-paper tabletop rule set created by Steve Jackson Games. GURPS was known for being adaptable to almost any setting, and the team thought it was a perfect fit for a post-apocalyptic RPG. They even got fairly far into development using it before the licensing deal fell apart. Steve Jackson Games eventually pulled out, reportedly uncomfortable with the violent content the game was heading toward. Fact 5. Because the GURPS license collapsed, the team had to build their own stat system from the ground up. This led directly to the creation of the Special System, which stands for Strength, Perception, Endurance, Charisma, Intelligence, Agility, and Luck. Leonard Boyarsky has said in interviews that they deliberately engineered the acronym so it would spell something meaningful. The Special System ended up being, by many accounts, far better suited to a video game than a GURPS adaptation ever would have been. The limitation became the foundation. Fact 6. Tim Kaine wrote the original game engine almost entirely by himself. He was working 70 or more hours a week during the heaviest periods of development. He has spoken publicly about how unsustainable that pace was, and how he is genuinely glad that the industry has evolved since then. But he also describes those years with a kind of reverence, because the work being done was genuinely exciting to him in a way that was difficult to replicate later. Fact 7. The original Fallout was released on September 30th, 1997. It did not immediately explode into mainstream success. The CRPG market in the late 90s was competitive and crowded, and a turn-based, isometric, post-apocalyptic RPG with dark humor and real consequences was not obviously a mass-market product. Word of mouth spread it slowly but steadily. Critics were enthusiastic. Over time, it built a devoted following. Fact 8. The setting of Fallout deliberately draws on the aesthetics of American pop culture from the 1940s and 1950s. The design language, from the Pip-Boy's look to the retro-futuristic cars that litter every road, to the propaganda posters on every wall, reflects a world where transistor technology was never developed. Instead of the digital revolution of the 1960s and onward that shaped our world, Fallout's universe went nuclear. Everything runs on atomic power. Televisions have vacuum tubes. Cars use fusion engines. It creates a world that feels like someone took the optimism of the post-war American dream and let it run forward uninterrupted into catastrophe. Fact 9. The divergence point between Fallout's history and our own is generally understood to be somewhere around the end of World War II. Before that moment, history appears to have unfolded more or less the same way. After it, things drifted apart. The transistor was not invented. The space race went differently. Corporations grew larger and more powerful than governments. Resource wars began in the 2050s and 2060s as oil became scarce, culminating in a full nuclear exchange on October 23, 2077. Fact 10. The Great War, as it is called in the lore, lasted only about 2 hours. The nuclear exchange was so total and so fast that there was almost no warning. People went from watching television in their living rooms to watching the sky light up in what felt like minutes. Vault-Tec, the corporation that had been building underground shelters ostensibly for civilian protection, had known it was coming. They had begun a lottery system for vault spaces, knowing full well that not everyone who bought a spot would actually be protected. Fact 11. The first Fallout takes place in the year 2161, which is 84 years after the bombs fell. The player controls a character known only as the Vault Dweller, who emerges from Vault 13 in Southern California to find a replacement water chip, which is a crucial component for the Vault's water purification system. What begins as a supply run becomes something far more significant when the Vault Dweller stumbles onto a conspiracy involving a being known as the Master and an army of super mutants. Fact 12. The villain of the original Fallout, the Master, is one of the most philosophically complex antagonists in the history of the medium. He is not merely evil. He believes, with complete sincerity, that humanity's only path to survival in the post-apocalyptic world is to evolve past humanity itself. He wants to create a race of super mutants that are stronger, smarter, and more resilient than normal humans. His plan has an internal logic. If you build your character's speech skills high enough, you can actually win a philosophical debate with him about the fundamental flaw in his plan, and he will willingly end things himself. That remains one of the most extraordinary moments in RPG history. Fact 13. The game was originally envisioned as having a much more comedic tone. Early concept documents show a game with significantly more absurdist humor and pop culture references. Tim Kane's personal rule during development was that no reference should appear that would confuse a player who did not understand the source material. Any joke had to work on its own terms, not just as a wink to people who knew the thing being referenced. He felt strongly that in-jokes broke immersion for people outside the circle. Fact 14. Fallout 2, released in 1998, was developed without Tim Kane, Leonard Boyarsky, and Jason Anderson, who had already left Interplay to found their own studio called Troika Games. The three founders of Fallout walked out before the sequel shipped. Kane has described the original Fallout 2 design documents as being completed by the three of them before they departed, including the main story arc and the way companions would work. What shipped was built on that foundation, but shaped by different hands. Fact 15. Fallout 2 features a remarkable number of fourth-wall-breaking moments, pop culture gags, and anachronistic references that Tim Kane specifically wanted to avoid in the first game. Characters reference the Terminator, Monty Python, Elvis. There is a location called the EPA. There are car chase sequences and pornographic film studios. The tonal shift was enormous. Some fans loved it. Others felt it undermined the serious, lived-in quality that made the original so affecting. The debate about which approach was correct has never fully been settled in the community. Fact 16. In Fallout 2's Golgotha Cemetery near New Reno, there is a grave marker that reads, Tim Kane, founder, lover, fighter, programmer. It was placed there by the developers of the game, a nod to the man who started it all, even though he was no longer part of the project when the game shipped. Fact 17. Typing the word boom on the original Fallout's credits screen triggers an animation. Tim Kane's head explodes. It is exactly as absurd as it sounds, and it is exactly the kind of deeply weird, self-aware detail that makes this series what it is. Fact 18. Tim Kane's face is also the icon used for Fallout 2 when viewed on older operating systems. On a Windows desktop, the game's shortcut icon displayed Kane's likeness. Most people who ever played the game on a PC probably never knew they were staring at the creator's face every time they double-clicked it. Fact 19. After the three founders left for Troika Games, the rest of the original Fallout team also gradually scattered. The division at Interplay that had made Fallout was renamed Black Isle Studios, and it went on to produce highly regarded RPGs, including Planescape, Torment, Fallout Tactics, and an early version of what would have been Fallout 3, codenamed Van Buren. Interplay's mounting financial troubles eventually forced Black Isle to shut down in December 2003, and Van Buren with it. Fact 20. The employees of Black Isle Studios, upon its closure, largely regrouped and formed Obsidian Entertainment in 2003. This matters enormously for what comes later, because the people who made the original games did not vanish. They regrouped, waited, and eventually got another shot at the franchise they had built. Before we continue, it is worth sitting with the sheer improbability of what these first 20 facts describe. A franchise that started as a second-choice project at a company that didn't think much of it, lost its core creative team before it was even fully established, watched its studio collapse, got sold to a company that made it unrecognizable to some of its original fans, and then somehow became one of the most beloved and enduring game series in history. The Wasteland has always been about survival against the odds. The franchise itself is a pretty good illustration of the same principle. Section 2. The World Before the War. Lore, History, and the Long Fall. Before we go further, let's pause and take a breath. If you are lying down right now, if the lights are low and you are just letting the wasteland wash over you, that is exactly the right way to be here. We will keep moving at our own pace. Fact 21. Vault-Tec Corporation was not primarily a survival shelter company. It was primarily an experiment company. The United States government, facing an increasingly unstable world, secretly partnered with Vault-Tec to design vaults that would serve as controlled sociological, psychological, and biological experiments on captive human populations. The survival pitch to the public was a cover story. Most of the people who filed into those vaults on October 23, 2077 were unknowing test subjects. Fact 22. There were officially 122 vaults built across the former United States. Of those, only a handful were what they advertised themselves to be, legitimate shelters. The rest had variables. Some had too few people, some had too many, some had contradictory social structures, engineered into them from the start. Some had experimental technology, some had modified atmospheric systems. The vaults were a massive multi-decade-long project in human data collection, run on the people who trusted the government most. Fact 23. Vault 11 in the Mojave Wasteland is one of the most disturbing vault experiments in the entire series. The vault's inhabitants were told that they must sacrifice one of their own to the vault's computer system every year, or everyone would die. The twist, which players discover at the end of a long terminal document sequence, is that the computer was lying. The Vault's actual directive was to test whether the population would comply with unjust demands under threat of death. The sacrifice was never necessary. The Vault ran its horrible ritual for decades before some inhabitants finally refused. Fact 24. Vault 12 in Necropolis, California, was built with a defective door that would never properly close. This was intentional. The Vault-Tec designers wanted to study the long-term effects of low-level radiation exposure on a sealed human population. The people inside gradually transformed into ghouls, the radiation-scarred, long-lived mutants who populate the Fallout world. They were made into what they became because someone wanted data. Fact 25. Vault 87 in the Capital Wasteland, near Washington, D.C., was the source of the super mutants terrorizing the eastern half of the United States in Fallout 3. The Vault was explicitly designed to administer FEV, the forced evolutionary virus, to its occupants. Unlike the Western super mutants, who were created by the Master's Army and retained significant intelligence, the Vault 87 mutation strain produced larger, more aggressive, but less intelligent creatures. The Lone Wanderer eventually learns this while searching for the Geetsky, and it explains why the East Coast mutant problem looks so different from what players encountered in the originals. Fact 26. Vault 77 exists only as an Easter egg. through a single torn comic strip found across multiple Bethesda games. The vault was populated by one man and a crate of puppets. The comic strips tell the story of his isolation, his gradual anthropomorphization of the puppets, and his eventual emergence into the wasteland, now accompanied by his puppet companions. It is melancholy and funny, and never formally acknowledged in the game's main narratives. Fact 27. Vault 101, the starting point of Fallout 3, was designed to never open. The experiment was to create a closed, self-sustaining community that would run indefinitely with no outside contact. The overseer who ran the vault at the time of the game's events had been maintaining this isolation for generations, despite the fact that the vault's purpose had long since become more about control than science. Fact 28. Vault 81 in the Commonwealth of Fallout 4 was designed to test various cures for diseases on its inhabitants. The chief scientist assigned to the project, in a remarkable act of defiance, sabotaged the experiment before it could fully begin. He infected himself instead of the Vault's children with every single disease the experiments were meant to test, then spent the rest of his life searching for cures. He eventually became a mole rat living in the substructure below the Vault, still mutated, still searching. His name was Dr. Burrow, and his story is told entirely through terminal entries scattered across the Vault's maintenance tunnels. Nobody in the Vault above knows what happened to him. The player can read the whole arc from his initial arrival, through his growing horror at his assignment, through his decision to sacrifice himself, to his final entries as his mind and body both changed in ways he had not anticipated. It is one of the most complete and most moving narrative arcs in Fallout 4, and it exists entirely in text that the game never once points the player toward. Fact 29. The Pip-Boy, the wrist-mounted computer device that serves as the player's interface in every Fallout game, has its origins in the lore as a Vault-Tec product. The first Pip-Boys were issued to Vault residents as personal information devices before the bombs fell. Different models appear across the series, with the Pip-Boy 3000 being the version seen in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, and the Pip-Boy 2000 Mark VI appearing in Fallout 76. When Bethesda redesigned it for the 3D era, they leaned heavily into the streamlined modern aesthetic of 1930s and 40s industrial design, giving it that smooth, rounded, retro-futuristic quality that has made it one of the most recognizable objects in gaming. Fact 30. The resource war that preceded the Great War began in earnest around 2052, when global petroleum reserves became critically low. Conflict between the United States and China over Alaskan oil fields escalated slowly and then rapidly, eventually resulting in both a Chinese annexation attempt and a full American military occupation of Alaska. The simulation of that Anchorage campaign becomes a playable mission in Fallout 3's Operation Anchorage DLC. Fact 31. The United States government, in Fallout's alternate timeline, responded to the resource crisis and growing social unrest by becoming increasingly authoritarian. The government suspended many civil liberties, dramatically expanded surveillance of its own citizens, and encouraged the development of propaganda. The Enclave, the shadowy government in waiting that serves as the main antagonist faction in Fallout 2, can be understood as the logical endpoint of that process. A government that valued its own survival over the survival of the people it was supposed to serve. Fact 32. Nuka-Cola is the Fallout universe's dominant soft drink brand, and it is genuinely everywhere in the games. The lore behind it is carefully constructed. Nuka-Cola Quantum, the rare glowing variant, achieved its distinctive blue luminescence because it was produced using a small amount of strontium-90 as a colorant. Strontium-90 is a radioactive isotope. The drink was mildly radioactive before the bombs even fell. Vault-Tec's product safety division had flagged the issue in internal memos, and the company's response was essentially, ship it anyway. Fact 33. The New California Republic, the Democratic Federation that serves as one of the major factions in Fallout 2 and is a central player in New Vegas, traces its origins to the survivors of Vault 15. After the Vault opened, those survivors founded Shady Sands, a small community that grew over decades into a city, then a state, then an entire republic modeled on pre-war democratic ideals. By the time of New Vegas in 2028, The NCR controls a significant portion of the western United States and is in a grinding resource war over Hoover Dam with Caesar's Legion. Fact 34. Caesar's Legion, the slave-based military empire that appears as one of the central factions in New Vegas, was founded by Edward Sallow, a former member of the New California Republic. Sallow was a scholar who had developed a deep academic interest in Roman history. After being kidnapped by a tribal group and eventually coming to dominate it, he reinvented himself as Caesar and began systematically conquering and absorbing neighboring tribes, rebuilding them in the image of the Roman legion. He is, in the game's lore, a man who imposed the logic of a history book onto living people. Fact 35. Mr. House, the enigmatic ruler of New Vegas in Fallout. New Vegas is one of the most fascinatingly specific characters in the entire series. Born in 1894, he used his immense wealth and his proprietary computing technology to predict with a high degree of accuracy when the bombs would fall. He built an elaborate system of defensive rockets around Las Vegas to shoot down the majority of incoming warheads, and then entered a cryogenic stasis chamber, sustaining himself through the centuries on life support systems. By 2028, he has been lying in that chamber for over 200 years, running New Vegas through a network of Securitron robots, and he is deeply, specifically, exactly himself. Arrogant, brilliant, and utterly convinced he is the only person capable of deciding humanity's future. What makes him particularly interesting is that he might be right about that last part, and the game is honest enough to leave the question open. He is making investments in humanity's future on a 200-year time horizon. He has the information and the patience and the resources that no living human being in the Mojave could match. Whether the ends justify his particular methods is what the player has to decide, and it is not a question with an obvious answer. Fact 36. The Strip in New Vegas is built inside and around the old Las Vegas casinos. Each casino in the game is run by a different group and reflects a different subculture of the wasteland. The Tops is controlled by the Chairman, a tribal group reinvented as suave 1950s gamblers. The Gomorrah is run by the Omertas, a mafia-styled family. The Ultra Lux is controlled by the White Glove Society, a group of cannibals who have convinced themselves they are refined aristocrats. Fact 37. The Followers of the Apocalypse are one of the less discussed but most genuinely idealistic factions in the series. They are a group of scholars, doctors, and educators dedicated to preserving and spreading knowledge throughout the wasteland, free of political agenda. They run clinics, teach people to read, and try to document history before it is lost. In New Vegas, they are squeezed between the competing empires of the NCR, Caesar's Legion, and Mr. House, and their very survival requires delicate political maneuvering. They represent the most straightforwardly human impulse in a series that often rewards the most cynical choices. Fact 38. The Institute, the mysterious faction in Fallout 4 operating from the ruins of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, is the primary manufacturer of synths in the game's lore. The question of whether synths are sentient and whether they have rights is the philosophical engine driving most of Fallout 4's major conflicts. The game never fully answers the question. It gives the player enough information to argue any position, and then lets them choose what they believe. Fact 39. The Railroad, another Fallout 4 faction, is directly modeled on the historical Underground Railroad, the network that helped enslaved people reach freedom in antebellum America. The naming is deliberate, and the parallels are clear. The Railroad helps synths who want to escape the Institute, giving them new memories and new identities. Their members use code names and communicate through dead drops. Their headquarters is hidden beneath Boston's historical Old North Church. The choice of Boston for this particular storyline is not accidental. The city is the cradle of American revolutionary thought, the birthplace of many of the philosophical arguments that justified resistance to unjust authority. Setting a story about the ethics of liberation in a city whose street stones remember that exact argument is the kind of deliberate layering that makes Fallout's world feel genuinely thought through. Fact 40. The Children of Atom are a religious faction that appears in multiple games, centered on the worship of nuclear radiation as a divine force. In their theology, atomic energy represents the potential for the universe to split itself into infinite new life, and those who embrace radiation rather than fear it are the truly faithful. By Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, they have a full monastic community on an island in Maine where the mist that blankets the landscape is itself heavily irradiated. There are members of this faction who can survive lethal radiation doses that would kill an unprotected wastelander in seconds. Hey, if you're watching this from your bed right now, drop your location and time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world people are listening from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a genuinely good time. There's a lot more where this came from. Section 3. The Experiments. What Vault-Tec was really building. Fact 41. Vault 92 was designed to study aggression. The Vault was populated primarily with some of the most talented musicians in America before the war. The atmospheric systems were seeded with subliminal white noise signals designed to trigger violent outbursts in specific residents at programmable intervals. The experiment was to study how violence spreads through a closed community and whether it could be weaponized. The discovery terminals the player finds in Fallout 3 documents the Vault's collapse into a killing ground. Fact 42. Vault 106 was designed to release psychoactive chemicals into the air supply approximately 20 days after it sealed. The Vault's residents would have begun experiencing unpredictable hallucinations, behavioral changes, and paranoia without any understanding of why. By the time the player explores Vault 106 in Fallout 3, the people still living there have been breathing those chemicals for 2 centuries. They are feral, violent, and barely recognizable as descendants of the people who first sought safety there. Fact 43. Vault 21 in Las Vegas, now buried under the New Vegas Strip, had its conflict resolution mechanism built directly into the Vault's social contract. Every dispute was to be settled by gambling. Resources, leadership, rights, punishments, all of it decided by chance. The entire social fabric of the community was structured around a commitment to randomness as justice. Mr. House, when he took control of Las Vegas, had the Vault sealed under concrete. Fact 44. Vault 29 was designed to accept only children under the age of 15 as residents. The ZAC supercomputer running the Vault raised the children according to a specific ideological framework emphasizing nature, anti-technology, and communal living. The adult Herald, a recurring character in the early games, was deeply connected to this Vault's legacy. The children it raised formed a tribal community called the Children of the Cathedral, which had complex and troubling ties to the Master's organization in the first game. Fact 45. Vault 34 in the Mojave Desert, near Fallout. New Vegas was supplied with an absurd overallocation of weapons and ammunition. The social pressure this created, combined with the Vault's highly restrictive rules about who could access the armory, led to a civil war within the Vault. By the time the courier explores it, the Vault is flooded, irradiated, and populated by feral ghouls who were once the Vault's security staff and general population. Fact 46. Vault 19 was divided into 2 groups, red and blue, who were assigned to separate sections of the facility and told that the other group could not be trusted. The experiment was a study in manufactured in-group and out-group dynamics. As the Vault's resources strained over time and the 2 groups' distrust of each other deepened, violence became increasingly inevitable. The Vault eventually expelled some of its residents, who became the Powder Gangers, a raider group in New Vegas who are notable for their habit of using explosives as their primary weapon. Fact 47. The Garden of Eden Creation Kit, or GEEK, is one of the most meaningful objects in the series' lore. It is a terraforming device distributed to select vaults with the intent that, when conditions outside were stable enough, the Vault dwellers would emerge and use it to reclaim and rebuild the land. It contains seed stocks, chemical supplements for soil reclamation, compressed building materials, and the knowledge base of an entire civilization. It is the post-apocalyptic world's hope packed into a suitcase. Fact 48. Nuka World, the theme park featured in Fallout 4's DLC, was built by Vault-Tec as a corporate showcase for the Nuka-Cola brand. In the pre-war timeline of the game's lore, Vault-Tec had acquired a partial ownership stake in Nuka-Cola and used the park as a marketing vehicle. The park's vault, Vault-Tec's only vault, entirely contained within a theme park attraction, was designed to test how long people could remain entertained in a closed environment before psychological breakdowns began. Fact 49. The vaults were not evenly distributed. The highest concentration of vaults is in California, which reflects the fact that Black Isle Studios, the original developers, were California-based and built their world around the landscapes they knew. California, Nevada, and the broader Southwest dominate the early games. When Bethesda took over and built Fallout 3, they moved to the East Coast, and the lore had to expand to explain why there were significant vault populations in Virginia, Maryland, and the Washington, D.C. area. Fact 50. Vault-Tec was one of the few corporations in the pre-war world that had been explicitly given advanced knowledge of the nuclear strike. This is confirmed in Fallout 4's pre-war timeline, shown through the opening prologue sequence. The Vault-Tec representative who visits the player's home to process their vault registration is asking for final paperwork on the very morning that the bombs fall. He knows what is coming. He cannot say so. He just smiles, takes the forms, and drives away. Fact 51. The official total of Vault residents who were actually kept safe by the Vault system, in the lore's own accounting, is vanishingly small compared to the millions who were turned away at the doors. The vaults were built to hold roughly 800 to 1,000 people each. Across all 122 vaults, that is somewhere between 97,000 and 122,000 people, given any real chance of survival. The United States in 2077 had a population of around 400 million. The math is the darkest part of the whole story. Fact 52. Vault-Tec's internal documents, scattered across multiple games and terminal entries and holodisks, reveal a corporate culture of stunning moral detachment. Employees referred to Vault experiment parameters the way a pharmaceutical company might refer to clinical trial protocols. They used passive voice and bureaucratic language to describe processes that were, by any ethical measure, crimes against humanity. The banality of it is deliberate. The writers are making a specific argument about how institutions normalize atrocity. Fact 53. In Fallout 76, which is set in Appalachia and takes place in 2102, players encounter vaults that are just beginning to open for the first time. The game's chronology puts it before all the other main entries, which means the player character is among the first vault dwellers to step outside since the war. The experimental nature of the vaults is fully present. Vault 79 was built to house the government's gold reserves. Vault 63 was a weapons testing facility. Vault 94 was a seed vault intended to restore plant life. Its residents selected specifically for botanical expertise. Fact 54. The Overseer system, the governance structure used in vaults where a single appointed leader holds absolute authority, was itself a variable in many experiments. Vault-Tec designed some vaults with democratic systems, some with overseer dictatorships, some with rotating leadership. The effects on vault stability, population cohesion, and eventual survival outcomes were all tracked. The company was, in a very real sense, running centuries-long political science experiments on people who thought they were being protected. Fact 55. The lone wanderer of Fallout 3 is one of the few vault dwellers in the series' entire history whose father intentionally chose vault life for protective, non-experimental reasons. James, the player's father, was not selected or assigned. He negotiated entry for himself and his newborn child because he needed a safe place to raise the child and continue his scientific work on Project Purity. The vault he chose, Vault 101, was still a Vault-Tec experiment. The protection he thought he was buying had strings he never fully understood. Fact 56. The Appalachian vaults in Fallout 76 include one of the most quietly heartbreaking experiments in the series. Vault 51 used an experimental Zax artificial intelligence system to select its overseer. The selection process, over the course of years, gradually eliminated candidates through increasingly manipulative psychological pressure until only one person remained. The final overseer was the person the AI had judged to be most psychologically durable and morally flexible. That is the character the player eventually encounters as a ghost within the Vault systems. Fact 57. The entire Vault system, in a meta sense, is Fallout's critique of Cold War civil defense culture in America. The 1950s and 1960s saw enormous popular investment in the idea that nuclear war could be survived with the right preparation, the right bunker, the right government guidance. Fallout takes that belief and shows what it would actually look like when the corporations and government agencies behind it were driven by self-interest and scientific curiosity rather than genuine concern for human welfare. The Vault is the American Fallout shelter dream, taken to its logical conclusion. Fact 58. In Fallout 4, there is a vault that exists entirely as a pre-war advertisement for the Vault program itself. Vault 81 is the most cosmetically normal vault in the Commonwealth, designed to look like the idealized version Vault-Tec sold to the public. It has functioning lights, a school, a medical facility, and residents who have maintained relatively stable community structures over the generations. The fact that its medical experiment was quietly sabotaged by a conscientious scientist is the detail that makes it honest. Fact 59. The term dweller became so associated with vault inhabitants that it persists in post-war wasteland slang as a term for anyone who has spent significant time underground, whether in a vault or otherwise. It carries a slightly pitying connotation in some communities, implying naivety about the real world. Fresh vault dwellers, as players experience in virtually every main game, are perpetually behind the cultural and survival knowledge curve of people who grew up in the open wasteland. Fact 60. Vault-Tec University, seen in Fallout 76, was the company's private educational institution where it trained the scientists, administrators, and engineers who would eventually staff and maintain the Vault system. By 2102, the university's facilities are still largely intact, and the terminal entries inside document a corporate academic culture that was, essentially, training the people who would run the experiments on human beings while pretending to be doing something more respectable. There is something quietly devastating about the Vault experiments when you hold them all together in your mind at once. Each one was someone's research proposal. Someone wrote a document describing the methodology. Someone else reviewed it and signed off on it. Committees approved budgets. Architects designed the specific physical configurations needed to run each study. Hundreds of people, probably thousands, across decades of pre-war corporate and government life, made choices that collectively constituted one of the largest unethical research programs in any fictional universe. And then the bombs fell and the experiments ran themselves. In the absence of observers, they simply continued because the conditions that made them run were still in place. That is probably the most honest thing Fallout says about how institutions work. Section 4. Factions, Legends, and Lost Causes. Fact 61. The Brotherhood of Steel originated from a single act of conscience. In October 2077, just days before the Great War began, Captain Roger Maxson was stationed at Mariposa Military Base in California, overseeing a team of scientists who were conducting experiments with the forced evolutionary virus on unwilling prisoners. When Maxson discovered the full nature of what was happening, he ordered the scientists arrested and, ultimately, executed. He then transmitted a message to the Pentagon formally announcing his secession from the United States military. 3 days later, the bombs fell. Fact 62. Maxson's decision to secede, in the timing of it, turned out to be a kind of accidental survival. Because he had already rejected the authority of the federal government, his unit was not following official orders when the war started. They were not deployed. They were not targeted as military assets. They were simply a group of soldiers and scientists holed up in a military base in California, trying to figure out what to do next. They survived because they had already checked out. Fact 63. The Brotherhood of Steel's founding philosophy, as established by Roger Maxson, was built on a deep ambivalence about technology. They had seen what science could do when stripped of ethical constraint. Their response was not to reject technology, but to hoard it, study it, and control who had access to it. This makes them functionally a technocratic order, not unlike a medieval guild or monastic order, which is exactly the aesthetic language the game uses to describe them. Fact 64. The Brotherhood splintered significantly over the centuries following its founding. The main body, based in California at a location called Lost Hills, became increasingly isolationist. A breakaway faction called the Midwest Chapter developed more radical views about technology control and even incorporated non-Brotherhood members into their operations, which was deeply controversial. The East Coast chapter that appears in Fallout 3 had been sent on a mission from California and gradually evolved its own distinct culture, ultimately becoming significantly more humanitarian than its parent organization. Fact 65. Elder Lyons, the leader of the East Coast Brotherhood chapter in Fallout 3, was considered a disgrace by much of the main Brotherhood hierarchy for exactly this reason. He had redirected his chapter's resources toward protecting civilians rather than hoarding technology, which violated the Brotherhood's core mission as most chapters understood it. There is a quietly painful thread running through Fallout 3 about what happens to an institution when one of its members decides to actually act on its stated ideals rather than its actual practices. Fact 66. Caesar's Legion, for all its surface brutality, has a functional economy, a functioning judicial system, a formal military hierarchy, and genuine internal social stability in its territory. Julius Caesar, the historical figure Edward Sallow modeled his empire on, also built something that many of its subjects experienced as more orderly than what came before it. The game does not ask you to endorse this, but it does ask you to understand it. The Legion is not chaos. It is a specific kind of order that chooses brutality as its tool. Fact 67. The NCR, by the time of New Vegas, is exhibiting every symptom of imperial overextension. Its military is underfunded and overstretched. Its politicians are corrupt. Its citizens back home are comfortable while its soldiers die in the Mojave Desert, fighting a war most of them don't fully understand. It is, without being subtle about it, a portrait of American imperialism. The developers have confirmed this reading explicitly in interviews. Fact 68. The Gunners in Fallout 4 are a mercenary organization with a rigid military hierarchy, military ranks, and what appears to be genuine institutional structure, but no cause beyond profit. They take contracts from anyone who can pay and follow orders with professional discipline. They represent the question the game asks about the Brotherhood and the NCR and every other faction. Is there a meaningful difference between order in service of something and order in service of nothing? Fact 69. Minutemen, another Fallout 4 faction, are the restoration of a pre-existing local defense organization that had been founded after the war by a group of settlers who wanted to protect communities without becoming a standing army. The name is deliberately drawn from the American Revolutionary context. Civilian volunteers who could be ready to fight at a moment's notice. By the time of the game, they are shattered, demoralized, and reduced to a single person named Preston Garvey, who nonetheless maintains the organizational identity because he cannot let it go. Fact 70. The Enclave, across the entire series, represents what Fallout thinks happens when a government survives a catastrophe but loses its people. They have the infrastructure, the hierarchy, the ideology, and the technical capacity of a functioning government. They simply no longer govern anyone in any meaningful sense. They have gone from being a state to being a faction, from serving a population to serving an idea. Their core belief that the pure human beings in their ranks are the legitimate inheritors of America requires them to view everyone who has been touched by radiation or mutation as something less than fully human. Fact 71. The Master's Army in the original Fallout, the Unity, is one of the series' most poignant factions in retrospect. The Master wanted to save humanity by replacing it with something better. His army of super mutants was supposed to be the new humanity. The devastating irony, which the player can discover through exploration and which can be weaponized in the climactic debate, is that the transformation process into super mutants is irreversible and renders its subjects sterile. The Master's plan to save humanity was, biologically, a dead end. His vision of the future was a generation of sterile soldiers. He had designed his own extinction. Fact 72. House's plan for New Vegas, the independent ending of New Vegas, is built on his belief that the history of civilizations follows predictable patterns. He calculates that without strong centralized leadership, managing the region's resources and keeping the peace between factions, the Mojave will be consumed by either the NCR's slow imperial decay or Caesar's aggressive conquest. He may be right. The game does not tell you definitively. It simply gives you his argument and the evidence, and lets you weigh them. Fact 73. Yes, man, the cheerfully cooperative Securitron who enables the player's independent takeover of New Vegas is one of the most quietly interesting characters in the series. He was programmed by Benny, the scheming chairman who shot the courier at the game's start, to be incapable of refusing orders from anyone. He is enthusiastically helpful in a way that the game codes as faintly disturbing. His final scene, where he mentions he has been thinking about modifying his own personality a bit to be less unconditionally helpful, is one of the most understated moments of self-awareness the series has produced. Fact 74. The Atom Cats in Fallout 4 are a faction built around a 1950s greaser aesthetic, centered on customizing and riding power armor. They are not militaristic. They are not ideologically rigid. They just love power armor and motorcycles and the culture around them. They are one of the small but specific examples of post-apocalyptic culture having arrived at something new rather than just surviving or rebuilding what came before. Fact 75. Good Neighbor in Fallout 4 is the settlement built in and around the old Scalle Square area of Boston. It was founded on a principle of accepting anyone regardless of what they were, where they came from, or what they had done, as long as they respected the community and left others alone. Its mayor, Hancock, is a ghoul with a fondness for chems and a surprising moral clarity about what he owes to people who have nowhere else to go. Fact 76. The Atom Cats, the Triggermen, the Gunners, Good Neighbor's community, the Diamond City government, Fallout 4's Massachusetts Commonwealth, is full of these small-scale social experiments in post-war culture. The game is, in many ways, less interested in the grand ideological conflict between the Institute, the Brotherhood, and the Railroad than in these granular attempts by ordinary people to build something livable out of ruin. Fact 77. The divide between the NCR and the Brotherhood of Steel, which is a deep and violent one by the time of New Vegas, stems directly from a conflict called the Brotherhood-NCR War, which ended approximately 3 years before the game begins. The Brotherhood launched a series of raids on NCR settlements to seize technology. The NCR, larger and better resourced, eventually pushed back hard enough to wipe out most of the Mojave Brotherhood chapter. By 2028-1, they are hiding in their bunker, depleted and paranoid, their leader Elder McNamara enforcing a policy of total lockdown that the game presents as both understandable and suicidal. Fact 78. Ulysses, the antagonist of New Vegas's Lonesome Road DLC and the original companion concept that was cut from the main game, embodies one of the series' central themes more directly than almost any other character. He is deeply invested in the idea of symbols, flags, and the stories nations tell about themselves. His entire conflict with the Courier is built on his belief that the Courier, through an act of unknowing destruction, erased something worth mourning. Whether that belief is justified, or whether it is the rationalization of a person who cannot move on, is the debate the DLC is built around. Fact 79. Dead Money, the first DLC for New Vegas and widely considered one of the finest pieces of the entire franchise, takes place at the Sierra Madre Casino, a resort and casino that was moments away from its grand opening when the bombs fell. The casino has been preserved in a state of near-perfect pre-war opulence by its automated systems and by a cloud of toxic gas that kills everything that breathes it for too long. Its owner, Frederick Sinclair, built the casino as a gift for a woman he loved, Vera Keyes, who was already being paid by an Enclave agent to spy on him. The casino is a monument to idealized love, built by a man who was being deceived. Fact 80. The ghouls who populate the Fallout series are one of its most philosophically interesting creature types. They are humans who survived direct exposure to massive radiation, which killed most people but transformed a small percentage into desiccated, long-lived beings who can no longer reproduce but can potentially live for centuries. Some retain full human intelligence and personality. Others, described as feral, have lost their cognition to the biological damage. The line between still a person and no longer a person in Fallout's ghoul population is one of the series' most persistent ethical questions. The factions of Fallout, when you lay them out side by side like this, reflect something honest about the way human beings organize themselves after catastrophe. Every ideology represented by every faction in this series has a historical precedent in the real world. The Brotherhood's technocratic hoarding mirrors every guild or academic institution that ever decided knowledge was too dangerous for general use. The NCR's imperial overextension mirrors every democracy that ever forgot what it was trying to protect while fighting to protect it. Caesar's Legion mirrors every strongman who ever decided that order purchased at the cost of freedom was a reasonable trade. The question Fallout is always asking is not which ideology is correct. It is whether the people inside any ideology can see clearly enough to choose what their values actually require of them in the specific moment they are living through. Section 5. The Wasteland Bestiary, Creatures, Science, and What F. Eve Made. Fact 81. The forced evolutionary virus, the biological agent at the root of supermutants, was developed before the war as part of a government research program officially intended to improve soldier performance. It was derived from extraterrestrial samples recovered from a crashed alien spacecraft, a lore detail that is referenced obliquely in the games and somewhat more directly in Fallout 76. The virus was designed to make human beings stronger, more resilient, and more capable of surviving in environments that would kill a normal person. What it actually did was far more radical than intended. Fact 82. Deathclaws, the iconic and absolutely terrifying apex predators of the Fallout wasteland, were also engineered rather than evolved. Before the war, they were created as a military project, engineered from the Jackson's chameleon through a combination of SEV exposure and selective genetic modification. The intent was to produce a biological weapon, a creature that could be deployed in hostile environments ahead of regular troops. After the war, with no one controlling the breeding populations, they spread across the continent and adapted to every environment they encountered. Fact 83. The Deathclaw's specific design, those angular plates, the massive claws, the bony ridges around the face, went through a significant evolution between the original isometric games and Fallout 3's first-person presentation. When Bethesda was redesigning the creature for a 3D environment where players would see it up close at eye level, they had to make choices about what made it genuinely terrifying rather than just large. The result leans heavily on the predatory bird silhouette. The way that the head moves reminds people of an eagle or a raptor. And that combination of familiar but wrong is part of what makes them so consistently effective at being frightening. Fact 84. The Scorch Beasts in Fallout 76 were designed as a specific threat tied to the new Appalachian setting. They are giant bat-like creatures mutated from the local fauna, and they are carriers of the Scorched Plague, the disease that drives much of the game's narrative threat. Their sonic attacks, which disrupt electronics and player defenses, were designed to create a distinct combat challenge that felt different from any enemy previously in the series. Fact 85. Rad scorpions, one of the earliest creatures players encounter in the original Fallout, are mutated descendants of the bark scorpion, a species native to the American Southwest. In the lore, FE5 exposure and radiation combined to scale them up dramatically and increase their aggression. In the original game, their design was constrained by the isometric perspective and the technical limitations of the engine. Each successive game has had the opportunity to redesign them, and they have grown progressively more detailed and more anatomically grounded in actual scorpion biology. Fact 86. Mole rats in the Fallout games are hairless, enlarged, and considerably more aggressive than their real-world counterparts, but they maintain the essential biological structure of naked mole rats, communal burrowing creatures with a eusocial colony structure. The games have, over the course of the series, developed fairly detailed lore about how their colonies operate, including a boss creature called the Mole Rat Broodmother, and variants with specific behavioral and biological properties tied to different regional populations. Fact 87. Mirelurks, the crab-like creatures native to water sources in the eastern United States, are mutated descendants of migratory horseshoe crabs. Their distinctive bipedal stance and armor-plated fronts evolved in response to centuries of irradiated coastal water exposure. The kings, the largest variant, can stand taller than a person and have developed a significant beak-like face structure that makes them read as something between a crab, a turtle, and a deep-sea fish. Their eggs, scattered near water sources in Fallout 3 and 4, are a significant environmental storytelling element. The creatures are breeding prolifically, and humans are not winning the ecological competition. Fact 88. Bloodbugs in Fallout 4 are mutated mosquitoes. They are large enough to be a genuine combat threat to adult humans, which means Bethesda took a mosquito and scaled it up to about the size of a large hawk. The visual design is faithful enough to actual mosquito anatomy that entomologists have noted the accuracy of certain anatomical features even at the expanded scale. Fact 89. The supermutant behemoths that appear in Fallout 3 are among the largest humanoid enemies in the series, standing somewhere between 4 and 5 meters tall. The lore explanation for their size is that supermutants, unlike humans, continue to grow throughout their lives. Older mutants are therefore larger mutants, A behemoth is simply a mutant that has survived long enough to become something that makes the ground shake when it walks. Fact 90. Synths, the synthetic humans created by the Institute in Fallout 4, come in 3 generations. Generation 1 synths are clearly robotic, skeletal machines. Generation 2 synths are more humanoid, with artificial skin and more expressive movement, but still visibly mechanical on close inspection. Generation 3 synths are biologically indistinguishable from humans. They have organic tissue, they breathe, they feel pain. They experience something that appears to function as emotion. The Institute's position is that they are property. The Railroad's position is that they are people. The game's position is that this is a genuinely hard question. Fact 91. Ghouls who become feral, according to the lore, do not undergo a sudden transformation. It is a gradual process, the slow erosion of cognitive function under the continued biological pressure of extreme radiation damage. A ghoul who was once a fully sapient, thoughtful person becomes feral through a process more like dementia than like a switch being flipped. This means that every feral ghoul the player kills was once someone. Fact 92. Cazadors, the large mutant wasps native to the Mojave Desert in New Vegas, are one of the most disliked enemies in the fan community, specifically because their aggressive swarming behavior and their venom, which applies a slow-draining poison effect, can make encounters with large groups of them genuinely very difficult, even for well-prepared players. Their design was specifically intended to make them feel like a natural hazard of the desert environment, rather than a dramatic combat threat. The developers wanted something that felt like accidentally walking into a wasp nest, scaled up to nightmare proportions. Fact 93. The Wendigo in Fallout 76 is a direct engagement with Appalachian folklore, representing the cannibalistic humanoid creature from indigenous North American traditions. In the game's lore, the Wendigo is a human or former human who underwent a specific kind of mutation accelerated by a particular behavioral pathology. They are fast, they are loud, and encountering one for the first time in the early game is designed to be genuinely alarming. Fact 94. In Fallout 76's lore, the Grafton monster is another creature drawn from West Virginian regional legend. Grafton is a real town in West Virginia, and the Grafton monster is a genuine piece of local folklore, a large, pale, headless creature sometimes reported near the Tygart Valley River in the 1960s. The game's version is a hulking, barely seen predator whose design attempts to honor the ambiguity of the original legend. Fact 95. Yao Guai, the mutant black bears of the American wasteland, appear across multiple games but are particularly prevalent in the colder, more forested regions of the Capital Wasteland and Far Harbor. The name is Mandarin for monster or demon, a naming choice that was likely intended to evoke the cultural contact between the United States and China that defined the pre-war political landscape. Fact 96. The legendary enemy system introduced in Fallout 4 creates a specific kind of creature encounter. Legendary enemies have mutated further than their standard counterparts, and when reduced to half their health, they mutate again mid-combat, healing themselves and gaining new abilities. This mechanic was designed to create fights that shift midway through, forcing the player to reassess their approach rather than simply applying the same strategy to completion. Legendary enemies also drop uniquely modified weapons and armor, making them worth the additional challenge. Fact 97. The fog crawlers in the Far Harbor DLC are among the most memorable environmental enemies in the series. They are enormous crustaceans that have adapted to the perpetually foggy, radiation-saturated island environment by developing camouflage properties and an aggressive territorial instinct that makes them particularly dangerous in the dense, visibility-reduced terrain of coastal Maine. Fact 98. Radgulls, which appear in both the base game areas near water and more prominently in Far Harbor, are mutant seagulls. They flock. They screech. They are deeply, specifically annoying in the way that seagulls are. The decision to include a post-apocalyptic analog to the seagull feels like a very specific creative choice made by someone who had strong feelings about seagulls. Fact 99. The Alien Blaster, a weapon that appears in every major Fallout game, connects to a thread of lore about extraterrestrial presence that runs quietly through the series. Aliens have been crash-landing on Earth and being recovered by the pre-war government for decades in the lore. Mothership Zeta, the most polarizing DLC Bethesda ever released for a Fallout game, puts the player directly onto an alien spacecraft. The connections between FEV, alien technology, and pre-war government research programs are never fully drawn together by any single game. Fact 100. Stingwings, which appear in Fallout 4, are mutant insects descended from stoneflies. They are primarily nuisances at lower levels, but become more threatening in the mid-game. Their real role in the ecosystem of the game is less as a combat challenge and more as an environmental texture element, part of the sense that the Commonwealth is genuinely alive with post-apocalyptic fauna that has claimed territory in every available niche. The creatures of Fallout are doing something that the games rarely call attention to directly. They are showing you an ecology. The wasteland is not a dead landscape. It is a living one, reorganized by 2 centuries of radiation and biological pressure into something that follows different rules but still follows rules. Predators find prey finds cover, insects find flowers that have adapted alongside them. The world ended, and then life did what life always does. It figured out the new conditions and got on with things. There is something quietly hopeful in that, if you are willing to see it, even when the thing that adapted is 6 times the size of its ancestor and can bite through power armor. Section 6, Development Secrets and Behind the Scenes, Fact 101. When Bethesda Softworks acquired the Fallout IP in 2007, they paid Interplay approximately $5.75 million for it. Given what the franchise became under their stewardship, this is now considered one of the most advantageous intellectual property acquisitions in the history of the games industry. Interplay, which retained a limited license to develop a Fallout MMORPG for several more years, ultimately saw that project canceled as well, following a protracted legal dispute with Bethesda. Fact 102. Fallout 3 began development in earnest after Bethesda completed Oblivion in 2006. Todd Howard, who served as game director, has described the team's ambition as wanting to make the definitive post-apocalyptic game, while also being deeply conscious of what the first 2 games had established. The shift from isometric, turn-based gameplay to first-person just real-time gameplay was the most controversial decision Bethesda made, and the critical and commercial reception of Fallout 3 suggests that for a large audience, it worked. Fact 103. Fallout 3's development lasted approximately 3.5 years, which was roughly the same length of time Bethesda had spent making Oblivion. The team that built it was considerably smaller than what would be considered standard for a project of that scope today. The relatively small size contributed to the dense, handcrafted quality of the capital wasteland, where nearly every location has a story written into its environment, even if no quest ever directs you there. Fact 104. The concept artist Adam Adamowicz, who worked on Fallout 3 and contributed enormously to the visual identity of Bethesda's era of the franchise, died in 2012. He was 42. His work defined the look of the capital wasteland, from the specific deterioration of the Washington, D.C. monuments to the design of enemies and armor sets. A tribute to him was placed in the Fallout 4 Creation Club, DLC. A room in the GNR Building Plaza is a recreation of his office, decorated with pieces of his concept art. Fact 105. Fallout. New Vegas was developed by Obsidian Entertainment, which, as covered earlier, was founded by former Black Isle Studios employees who had worked on the original games. When Bethesda approached Obsidian about developing a new Fallout game, the offer was accepted because many of those developers had deeply personal stakes in the franchise they had helped create. The contract they were given came with a royalty bonus tied to Metacritic review scores that Obsidian narrowly missed qualifying for, an outcome that has been discussed extensively by those involved as a significant professional disappointment. Fact 106. Obsidian was given 18 months to develop Fallout, New Vegas. Game designer J.E. Sawyer has confirmed in various interviews and public statements that the actual usable development time, accounting for pre-production and the early period of learning the engine, was closer to 10 months. The fact that the resulting game is as large, detailed, and narratively complex as it is represents one of the most extraordinary production feats in the history of open-world game development. Fact 107. The companion Ulysses was fully planned and partially written as a main game companion before being cut approximately 2 months before the game's release. The decision was partly about optimization, partly about time. The character was repurposed into the antagonist of the Lonesome Road DLC, which became one of the most discussed pieces of content in the franchise's history. Files found on development kits discovered at a Utah game store in 2024 confirm the extent of his original planned role. Fact 108. Fallout. New Vegas had a Metacritic score of 84 on release. Obsidian's bonus was contingent on a score of 85 or above. The specifics of the bonus structure have been discussed by former Obsidian employees, including Chris Avallone. Bethesda, for their part, has never publicly addressed the matter in detail. The 1-point gap has become something of a rallying cry in community discussions about how publishers structure development agreements. Fact 109. The Wild Wasteland trait in New Vegas was partially inspired by the tone of Fallout 2, which had been significantly more irreverent and reference-heavy than the original game. Rather than injecting that tone throughout New Vegas, Obsidian made it an opt-in feature. Players who wanted the winking, pop culture-aware humor of Fallout 2 could choose it. Players who wanted a more grounded, serious experience could decline it and would not encounter those elements at all. Fact 110. Bethesda has confirmed that Fallout 4 was in some form of development for several years before it was announced. Todd Howard announced the game in June 2015, and it released in November of the same year, a gap of approximately 5 months between announcement and release that was unusual for a major title at that time. The promotional campaign between announcement and release was deliberately compressed, intended to minimize the lengthy anticipation periods that the industry had come to see as a source of fan disappointment. Fact 111. Fallout 4 features the first fully voiced protagonist in the series. The player character, regardless of which gender the player chooses, speaks in full dialogue. This was a significant departure from the series' text-heavy RPG tradition, and it was divisive. Some players felt it deepened the sense of inhabiting a real character. Others felt it reduced the range of ways the player could interpret and personalize their character, because hearing a specific voice and tone delivers a more defined personality than reading text responses. Fact 112. The settlement building system in Fallout 4 was an unplanned addition to the game. Bethesda's team had been experimenting with building and placement tools internally, and at some point in development, someone suggested making it player accessible. It became one of the most discussed features of the game, polarizing the community between players who found it deeply engaging and those who felt it distracted from the RPG fundamentals. Fact 113. Fallout 76 was announced in May 2018 and released in November of the same year, giving it approximately the same announcement to release period as Fallout 4. The difference was that Fallout 76 was an online multiplayer experience, the first in the series, and the compressed development timeline was far more consequential. The game launched with significant technical issues, missing features, and a level of quality that did not meet community expectations. The weeks following launch were genuinely difficult for Bethesda's public reputation. Fact 114. Fallout 76's launch controversy extended beyond software bugs. The collector's edition of the game included a canvas bag that was advertised but shipped as a nylon bag instead. The response from Bethesda's initial customer service contact, suggesting that replacement canvas bags could not be offered because of the cost of the canvas, was widely circulated and ridiculed. Bethesda eventually replaced the bags, but the episode became one of several data points in a larger narrative about the launch's handling. Fact 115. The Fallout TV show was produced by Amazon Studios and premiered in April 2024. It was developed with the direct involvement of Bethesda and Todd Howard, who served as executive producer. The decision to set it in a new location, the post-nuclear Los Angeles area, with new characters rather than directly adapting any of the game's stories, was deliberate. The show needed to work for viewers with no game familiarity while still being deeply satisfying for long-con fans. Fact 116. Ron Perlman, who narrated the iconic War Never Changes opening monologue in Fallout, Fallout 2, Fallout 3, Fallout Tactics, and Fallout New Vegas, was reportedly paid $40 and a sandwich for his work on the original game. He has said this himself in interviews, describing the gig as a standard low-budget voice work job in 1997 that he thought nothing of at the time. His agent brought him back for Fallout 2 roughly a year and a half later, and the series grew from there, into one of his most enduring professional associations. Fact 117. Ron Perlman did not narrate Fallout 4, which broke the tradition established by every previous main entry. In Fallout 4, the protagonist speaks the opening monologue themselves, beginning the game with "War, war never changes," in the player character's voice rather than Perlman's. However, Perlman does appear in the game's prologue, voicing a television news anchor, delivering updates on the unfolding crisis in the moments before the bombs fall. Fact 118. Todd Howard has mentioned in multiple interviews across the years that Fallout 4 contains at least one secret that nobody has ever found. He repeated this claim as late as 2023. Whether this is a genuine mystery still buried in the code, or a piece of mythology he has been cultivating, is unknown. But the claim has driven a segment of the community to continued systematic exploration of the game years after its release. Fact 119. Van Buren, the canceled Fallout 3 developed by Black Isle before their closure, had a design document that survived the studio's dissolution. Obsidian, many of whose founding members had worked at Black Isle, had access to those documents when developing New Vegas, and several of Van Buren's elements and characters were adapted into it. The Burned Man, who became the character Joshua Graham in the Honest Hearts DLC, originated in Van Buren concept documents. Joshua Graham himself, the Mormon missionary turned Legion general who was set on fire and thrown into the Grand Canyon as punishment for failing Caesar at the First Battle of Hoover Dam, and who survived by climbing out of the canyon with nothing but will and faith, is one of the most quietly extraordinary character concepts in the series. The Honest Hearts DLC that features him runs only a few hours. It contains more genuinely affecting human writing than many full games. The fact that it originated in documents written for a game that was never made gives it an additional, melancholy weight. Fact 120. The engine used by Bethesda for their Fallout games, commonly referred to as the Creation Engine, is a direct descendant of the Gamebryo engine that powered Morrowind and Oblivion. Obsidian used the same engine for New Vegas, having licensed it from Bethesda. The engine has been criticized over the years for specific technical limitations, but it has also been praised for its modding accessibility, which has been a significant part of why the Bethesda Fallout games have maintained active communities for over a decade after release. The development history of the Fallout series is, in a real sense, a story about what happens when extraordinary creative energy runs into the ordinary realities of corporate life. Budget constraints, licensing collapses, studio closures, deadline pressure, bonus structures, all of the least romantic parts of making entertainment for money. And yet the games that resulted from all of that constraint, from all of that compromise and cut content and redirected ambition, are games that people are still actively returning to and still finding things in. There is something almost wasteland appropriate about that. The most valuable things in the series tend to be the things that survived the hardest conditions. Section 7. Easter Eggs and Hidden Details. Fact 121. The Wild Wasteland perk in New Vegas creates an enormous number of encounters that only players who selected it will ever see. Near Goodsprings, at the very beginning of the game, players with the perk will discover a refrigerator containing a skeleton wearing a fedora hat. This is a reference to the Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull scene, where Indy survives a nuclear blast inside a lead refrigerator. The fedora is wearable. Fact 122. In the Wild Wasteland version of events, the alien encounter near Horowitz Farmstead involves a crashed UFO and 3 aliens, one of whom carries a unique alien blaster. Without the perk, the weapon and the encounter do not exist. The decision to include this through a perk reflects Obsidian's awareness that some players found the series' alien content tonally jarring, and others loved it, so they built a toggle into the game. Fact 123. Near the ruins of Nipton in New Vegas, where Caesar's Legion has burned the town and executed its residents, players with the Wild Wasteland perk can find 2 skeletons lying next to a moisture vaporator. This is a reference to the Star Wars scene on Tatooine, where Luke Skywalker finds the charred remains of his aunt and uncle. The connection between the 2 desert settings and the discovery of people killed by raiders is deliberate and quiet. Fact 124. In Fallout 3, road signs scattered across the capital wasteland occasionally bear the code TES-04. This is a reference to The Elder Scrolls IV, Oblivion, Bethesda's previous game before Fallout 3. It is the kind of self-referential Easter egg that would only register to players who already knew what they were looking at, but which would also be completely invisible to anyone else. Fact 125. The Fallout 4. Cheers Easter egg involves finding a post-nuclear version of the famous bar from the television show. The in-game bar is called Probst, which is the German word for cheers. It contains the skeletons of people who died there during or after the nuclear war. Every member of the regular gang is present, still seated in their usual spots. The detail that the game bothered to give a German name to the bar, rather than just using cheers, is the level of specificity that rewards players who both get the reference and think carefully about it. Fact 126. In Fallout 4, the robot butler Codsworth can say hundreds of first names that players might give their character. The developers recorded a full library of common names, and Codsworth will address the player by whichever one they chose at character creation. Hidden within this library are also some names that were recorded, but that Bethesda apparently did not want widely publicized, including a number of profane names, the name Fishlips Malone, Squidlips Malone, and Fusro Da, the famous shout from Skyrim. Fact 127. Fallout 3's Mothership Zeta DLC contains, deep in the alien ship's audio archives, recordings from ancient Earth history the aliens had collected on previous visits. These include a recording of Jing Wei, the Chinese general from the Operation Anchorage DLC, and other historical figures. The suggestion is that the aliens have been visiting Earth for a very long time and have been quietly documenting human civilization without intervening in it. Fact 128. In the Fallout 3 Museum of Technology, there is a full-scale replica of a Pip-Boy that is large enough to walk through. This is a purely aesthetic detail with no gameplay function, but it is one of the most striking environmental storytelling moments in the game. A reminder that the Pip-Boy, in the Fallout world, is a sufficiently important piece of technology that it ended up enshrined in a museum. Fact 129. The Ticonderoga Safe House in Fallout 4, one of the railroad's operational dead drops, is in a high-rise building. The top floor, accessible only by a specific sequence of elevator use and navigation, contains a fully equipped railroad operation that most players never discover because the quest that leads there requires fairly specific alignment with the railroad faction and attentive reading of quest directions. Fact 130. The Kellogg's memories, explored in Fallout 4 using a device that allows the sole survivor to relive the dead mercenaries' experiences, are among the most emotionally textured sequences in the game. The player watches Kellogg's life from the inside, including a childhood in the NCR that explains exactly how a child from a difficult background ends up becoming the person who made the decision that drives the game's central story. The sequence humanizes him without exonerating him. Fact 131. There is an Easter egg in New Vegas involving the song "It's a Sin to Tell a Lie," played on Mojave Music Radio. If the player listens carefully to the environmental details when this song is playing near certain NPCs, specific characters will react to the lyrics in ways that reflect their personal situations. This level of audio-environmental narrative integration is subtle enough that many players who discovered it felt it was accidental until forum discussions confirmed it was deliberate. Fact 132. The Titanic reference in Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC involves a lake north of the nucleus. Two skeletons are floating in the lake, one on a door and one partially submerged gripping its edge. The door is large enough for both skeletons to fit on it. The development team at Bethesda, in building this Easter egg, appears to have taken a side in one of cinema's longest-running debates. Fact 133. In Fallout 3, the Vault Security Terminal in Vault 92 contains entries from the scientists running the aggression experiment that become progressively more clinical in their language, even as the events they describe become more horrifying. This is not an Easter egg in the traditional sense, but is a piece of deliberate environmental writing that rewards players who take the time to read every terminal in the vault from start to finish. Fact 134. In Fallout New Vegas, the ending slides read by Ulysses in the Lonesome Road DLC change significantly based on player choices. If the player has launched nukes at both the NCR and Caesar's Legion and has the Wild Wasteland perk active, the slide shows the Unification Monument at the Mojave Outpost half buried in sand, And Ulysses's narration includes the line, "He had damned them all to hell." The visual and dialogue together are a deliberate reference to the ending of the 1968 Planet of the Apes film, Fact 135. Fallout 4 contains a reference to the TV show Breaking Bad, in the form of a blue methamphetamine recipe on a kitchen terminal in one of the Commonwealth's less visited locations. The exact location is in a house that has clearly been used for illegal chemistry, with the relevant equipment and materials present as environmental props. Fact 136. The number 2077 is written into the architecture of the Fallout universe in multiple places as a deliberate nod to the year the bombs fell. Some examples of this are straightforward: building numbers, locker codes, terminal passwords. Others are more hidden: production dates on pre-war items, serial numbers on equipment, timestamps on documents. Players who pay attention to numbers in the environment will encounter 2077 more often than could possibly be coincidental. Fact 137. In the capital wasteland of Fallout 3, there is a small, undirected Easter egg involving a toy rocket ship on a shelf in a specific building in Rivet City. The toy is positioned pointing at a specific window. If the player looks out that window in the direction the toy is pointing, they can see a small detail in the landscape that mirrors the arc the toy appears to be describing. It is one of those details that exists entirely to reward players who look carefully at things for no immediately obvious reason. Fact 138. The Fallout 76 wild and wonderful West Virginia setting includes references to numerous pieces of actual regional folklore and history, including the Mothman, a real piece of West Virginian legend from the 1960s. The game's Mothman is given specific biological and behavioral properties, and players can eventually find a cultist organization devoted to its worship. The real Mothman sightings occurred primarily around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which is a location represented in the game. Fact 139. There is an Easter egg in Fallout 4 that references the video game series The Elder Scrolls. The plant Nirnroot, which is distinctive to the Elder Scrolls universe and known for a particular sound it emits in those games, can be found growing on the Prydwen, the Brotherhood's airship. Its presence has been debated by fans. Some see it as a canonical hint that the universes share a timeline, while Bethesda's marketing executive, Pete Hines, explicitly stated at E3 2017 that the two series do not share a universe. The plant remains on the ship regardless. Fact 140. The Silver Shroud costume and quest in Fallout 4 is one of the most fully realized Easter eggs in the game, functioning as a complete homage to the pulp superhero genre of the 1930s and 40s. The Silver Shroud is a fictional radio drama hero from the pre-war world, and finding and wearing the costume while using a specific weapon causes the game's dialogue options to change, allowing the player to roleplay as the Shroud with period-appropriate melodramatic lines. NPC responses to this change if the player commits to the roleplay. Kent Connolly, the ghoul who gives the quest, is one of the most genuinely endearing characters in Fallout 4. His love for the Silver Shroud is not a coping mechanism or a delusion. It is a genuine act of remembrance, a way of holding on to the cultural life of a world that most people around him have completely forgotten. He keeps the spirit of it alive with the same fidelity that Galaxy News Radio keeps the music alive, because some things deserve to outlast the catastrophe that tried to end them. The Easter eggs of Fallout, taken as a collection, reveal something about the developers who put them there. They are people who care about what they made, deeply enough to hide pieces of themselves inside it, at a level of specificity that most players will never reach. It is a kind of writing that does not need to be read to justify its existence. It exists for the people who do find it, and the awareness that it might be found someday is apparently enough to make it worth doing. That is a pretty generous philosophy of creative work. Section 8. Music, sound, and the feeling of the wasteland. Fact 141. The music of the Fallout series is divided, historically, into two distinct eras with two distinct approaches. In Bethesda's games, the licensed pre-war pop and big band songs from the 1930s through the 1950s play through in-game radio stations, while original ambient and dramatic scores play during exploration and combat. In the Obsidian-developed New Vegas, the same structure applies. The original games used primarily original music in a style that evoked the retro-futuristic aesthetic without directly using period recordings. Fact 142. I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the Ink Spots, used as the opening musical piece for Fallout 3's E3 2008 reveal trailer, and again at key moments in the game itself, became one of the most iconic uses of licensed music in gaming history. The choice of a song about romantic obsession and its specific lyrical content, combined with the images of nuclear devastation, created an emotional resonance that people are still describing 20 years later. The reveal trailer, which opened with the Ink Spots performance and then pulled back to show the first glimpse of the capital wasteland, remains one of the most discussed game trailers ever made. Fact 143. Composer Inon Zur has scored every Bethesda-published Fallout game: Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 4, and Fallout 76. His approach to the series' original score has been to work in the idiom of the 1940s and 50s, big band orchestral tradition, while incorporating electronic elements that reference the retro-futuristic aesthetic. His main theme for Fallout 4, which builds from a quiet piano motif into a full orchestral statement, is regularly cited as one of the finest game scores of its generation. Fact 144. Inon Zur's Fallout 4 score was recorded with a live orchestra in London. He has described the scoring process for that game as one of the most creatively intensive of his career, because the open-world structure meant he needed to compose music that could loop, transition, and react to gameplay states across an enormous variety of situations without ever becoming repetitive or emotionally inappropriate. The modular layered structure of the score, which allows different instruments and sections to fade in and out based on the moment, was designed specifically to solve this problem. Fact 145. Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3 plays 20 licensed songs. In a game that players might spend 50 or 100 hours in, this means the same 20 tracks loop repeatedly. By most conventional wisdom, a 20-song playlist would become maddening over that duration. The consensus in the fan community, however, is that somehow it does not. The specific selection of songs, the way they contrast with the silence and gunfire of the wasteland, and the association they build with specific emotional memories of playing through the game, gives them a staying power that defies the conventional wisdom. Fact 146. 3 Dog, the DJ of Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3, was voiced by Eric Todd Dellums. His character was so beloved by fans that when players learned there was a possibility that 3 Dog might not return in any future game, there was a significant online campaign to have him included. Dellums himself engaged with this campaign through social media in a way that was warmly received by the community. Fact 147. Mojave Music Radio in Fallout New Vegas uses a different musical selection from Galaxy News Radio, leaning more heavily into Western and country music to reflect the desert Southwest setting. Songs by artists like Johnny Cash, Hank Williams, and Dean Martin appear on the station. The curatorial logic of Mojave Music Radio is that the music reflects the frontier character of the Mojave, something rougher, more lonesome, and less polished than the urban big band sound of the East Coast. Fact 148. New Vegas also includes a classical music station operated by a Mr. New Vegas character, voiced by comedian Wayne Newton, who was born in Norfolk, Virginia, but raised in Nevada and is strongly associated with Las Vegas. His casting was an in-joke for people familiar with his history. Wayne Newton has performed in Las Vegas for over 60 years. Mr. New Vegas, who presents the music with smooth, professional warmth despite the apocalypse happening around him, is a loving portrait of an era of entertainment that the game is in many ways eulogizing. Fact 149. The music in the original Fallout 1 and 2 was composed by Mark Morgan, who was brought back to contribute additional tracks to Fallout New Vegas as a nod to the original game's identity. His compositions for the early games have a distinctive quality, ambient, sparse, and slightly unsettling, built from electronic textures and occasional melodic fragments rather than traditional orchestral themes. Fans of the original games consider his work foundational to the series' atmospheric identity. Fact 150. The sound design of the Fallout series, separate from its music, involves an enormous library of custom recordings and processed sounds. The hiss of a Pip-Boy being activated, the specific click of power armor joints, the wet, particular sound of a Deathclaw's footsteps on different surfaces, the crackle of a radiation environment on a Geiger counter. All of these sounds were constructed specifically for their contexts and have become as recognizable as the visual design of the games. Fact 151. Fallout 76's Appalachian bluegrass-infused musical identity was a deliberate creative choice by the game's audio director. The ambient and exploration music incorporates folk and Appalachian musical elements as a way of grounding the experience in the specific cultural landscape of West Virginia, separate from the more generic 1950s Americana of the other games. It gives Fallout 76 a sonic personality that is genuinely distinct from any other entry in the series. Fact 152. The sound of the Fat Man, the portable nuclear catapult that fires miniature nuclear warheads, was designed to be deeply satisfying in a way that other weapons in the game are not. The specific combination of mechanical loading sounds, the thump of the projectile launching, the delay before impact, and the particular explosion sound were refined over many iterations to produce the exact feeling the development team was aiming for, something that felt both ridiculous and appropriately massive. Fact 153. In Fallout 4, the game's main theme appears in a modified form in several of the game's most emotionally significant moments, woven into the fabric of the larger orchestral score in ways that are not immediately obvious on first playthrough but become apparent on repeated listening. Inon Zur has confirmed that this motif-based approach to scoring was intentional, intended to create a subliminal sense of musical through-line connecting the game's emotional high points. Fact 154. The Diamond City Radio in Fallout 4 is presented as a more modest, less polished operation than Galaxy News Radio, which reflects Diamond City's character as a scrappy, self-sufficient community that built itself up from scratch rather than inheriting pre-war infrastructure. The DJ, Travis Miles, begins the game as a nervous, self-deprecating presence who grows in confidence through a companion quest that involves helping him deal with his anxiety. His development is one of the quieter character arcs in the game. Fact 155. Maybe by the Ink Spots, which plays during certain moments in Fallout 4 and was used prominently in promotional materials, has a particular lyrical relevance to the game's central story. The song is about waiting for someone who may never return. For a player character who has been frozen for over 200 years and emerges to find their world destroyed and their child missing, the song is extraordinarily well chosen. Fact 156. The musical selection for Fallout 3's Galaxy News Radio is built around songs that were genuinely popular on American radio between 1935 and 1955. The rights to license these recordings were negotiated specifically for the game, and the specific selections were made partly for rights availability and partly for emotional fit. The Ink Spots, Billy Eckstein, Billie Holiday, Bob Crosby, and the Bobcats. The playlist is a genuine artifact of a specific era of American popular music. Fact 157. The ambient cave sounds in the early Fallout games were designed to create a sense of discomfort that is distinct from the discomfort of combat. Combat in Fallout is tense and tactical. The ambient sounds of the underground sections are designed to be psychologically unsettling in a different way, quieter, more uncertain, building a sense of something wrong without making it clear what it is. Fact 158. The Fallout TV show's score was composed by Ramin Djawadi, who is best known for his work on Game of Thrones and Westworld. His approach to the Fallout show's music was to balance the retro-futuristic aesthetic of the games with the dramatic needs of a live-action narrative. The use of the Ink Spots music in the show's promotional materials and at specific moments in the show itself was a deliberate bridge between the show's identity and the game's established musical language. Fact 159. Voice acting in Fallout, New Vegas features an exceptional cast that includes many recognizable presences. Matthew Perry voiced Benny, the main antagonist of the early game. Zachary Levi voiced Arcade Gannon. Chris Christopherson voiced Chief Hanlon. Michael Dorn, who played Worf in Star Trek The Next Generation, voiced Marcus the Super Mutant. Felicia Day voiced Veronica. The casting of New Vegas, given its rushed development timeline, is remarkably star-studded. Fact 160. Matthew Perry's performance as Benny in New Vegas was, by multiple accounts from developers, a genuine pleasure to work with. Perry was apparently deeply enthusiastic about the project. After Perry's death in October 2023, the Fallout community's expressions of grief were significant and heartfelt, with many players revisiting the game specifically to spend time with his performance. There is something about the way music and sound interact with the Fallout experience that makes it different from almost any other game series. You are never simply receiving the music. You are always hearing it through the in-world context of a broken radio in a broken world, which means the survival of the music is part of its meaning. That a song recorded in 1940 can still play in 2028 is not just a design choice. It is a statement about what endures. The world can end and the music does not stop. Someone who loved it enough wound up the machine and let it keep running. That is a kind of tenderness hiding at the heart of a very dark universe, and it is one of the real reasons this series has the hold on people that it does. Section 9, Fallout 4 and the Commonwealth, Fact 161. The Commonwealth of Fallout 4, set in the ruins of Greater Boston and Massachusetts, was chosen specifically because it offered a rich historical and architectural contrast with the Mojave Desert of New Vegas and the Washington, D.C. area of Fallout 3. Boston is one of America's oldest cities, with layers of colonial, revolutionary, and industrial history built on top of each other. The game uses this layering deliberately. Pre-war industrial Boston sits on top of revolutionary Boston, and the game's story about rebuilding society sits on top of all of it. Fact 162. The Institute, the secretive high-tech organization beneath M1T, is deliberately designed to be morally ambiguous even at the level of its aesthetic. Unlike the Brotherhood of Steel, which looks like a military cult, or the Railroad, which looks like a resistance movement, the Institute looks clean and clinical and genuinely scientific. It is visually pleasant in a way that requires active critical engagement to question. That is intentional. Fact 163. Fallout 4's main character, the sole survivor, is the only protagonist in the series to have a personal, pre-war identity that the player experiences directly. The opening sequence shows their life before the bombs fell. A family, a home, a sense of what the world used to be. This grounding changes how the exploration of the wasteland feels. Where previous protagonists entered the wasteland as people who had never known anything else, the sole survivor carries a direct comparison point. Fact 164. The game's Vault 111, was positioned in a suburban neighborhood in Sanctuary Hills, Massachusetts. The neighborhood is based on an actual suburban development pattern common to 1950s American residential planning. The specific street design, the identical ranch-style houses, the cul-de-sac layout, these are real elements of post-war American suburban development that Bethesda translated into the game, with enough specificity that residents of similar neighborhoods in the real world have reported a specific kind of recognition playing through the opening. Fact 165. Dogmeat, the series' recurring canine companion, is in Fallout 4 a German Shepherd. The dog who served as the visual reference model for Dogmeat's design in Fallout 4 was a dog named River, who belonged to one of the game's lead designers. River died during development. The dog's memory is embedded in one of the most beloved characters in the series. Fact 166. Nick Valentine, the synth detective companion in Fallout 4, is the most explicitly noir character the series has produced. His backstory, his dialogue patterns, his relationship to his own nature as a Gen 2 synth carrying the memories and personality of a pre-war human who died, creates a philosophical puzzle that the game gives the player extensive time to sit with. Nick does not know whether the human whose memories he carries would recognize what he has become. He has decided to live as if it matters either way. Fact 167. The Minutemen questline in Fallout 4 is the only main questline that does not require the player to choose sides among the game's primary factional conflict. The Minutemen's victory condition is the defeat of the Institute, but it can be achieved while maintaining positive relations with all other factions until the final choice becomes unavoidable. This makes it the path of least factional sacrifice, which has made it a common recommendation for first-time players who want to see as much of the game as possible. Fact 168. The Silver Shroud radio drama, pieces of which can be heard playing in certain locations across the Commonwealth, was produced in the pre-war world as a pulp hero story. The actual lore of the Silver Shroud within the game is surprisingly detailed. There are multiple episode summaries, a history of the character, and contextual information suggesting the drama ran for multiple seasons before the war ended its broadcast. This depth of invented cultural artifact is characteristic of the care Bethesda puts into creating the sense that the pre-war world was a fully realized place. Fact 169. The quest, The Secret of Cabot House, is one of the most bizarre and lore-expanding quests in Fallout 4. It involves a family of exceptionally long-lived humans who have been sustained for over 400 years by an artifact of extraterrestrial origin. The Cabot family patriarch traveled to Arabia in the 1890s as an archaeologist and brought back something that changed his family's biology permanently. The quest gestures toward an entire mythology that the game never fully articulates, which makes it more intriguing than if it had been explained completely. Fact 170. The Mechanist's Lair, accessible through the Automatron DLC, is built in a massive underground facility below a Massachusetts roadside attraction. The Mechanist, the DLC's antagonist, is a character in a superhero costume who genuinely believes they are protecting people with their army of robots, and who is deeply distressed when confronted with evidence that the robots are killing people rather than helping them. The resolution of the DLC, which can be peaceful if the player pursues the dialogue options, is one of the more genuinely compassionate conclusions in the series. Fact 171. Diamond City's Mayor McDonough is a synth who has been working as a mole for the Institute, and discovering this through careful play is one of the most satisfying revelation arcs in the game. The clues are present throughout Diamond City before the player has any reason to look for them, meaning that on a second playthrough, watching McDonough's behavior with the knowledge of what he is becomes a genuinely different experience. Fact 172. The Far Harbor DLC introduced the idea of a fully realized island community of children of Adam who are biologically adapted to radiation in a way that goes beyond what standard ghouls experience. The island's fog, the permanent radioactive mist that covers coastal Maine, has become something the most devout members of the children have physically adapted to absorb rather than avoid. The biology here is not fully explained and is presented as something miraculous within the faction's own theological framework. Fact 173. Piper Wright, the journalist companion in Fallout 4, runs a newspaper called Public Occurrence in Diamond City. The name is a direct reference to public occurrences both foreign and domestic, one of the first newspapers published in colonial America, first printed in Boston in 1690. The choice of that specific name for a Boston-area journalist in a game that is dense with historical reference is entirely deliberate. Fact 174. Codsworth, the robotic butler companion who greets the player at the beginning of Fallout 4 and can be found again in the ruins of Sanctuary Hills, has been maintaining the player character's home for 210 years in their absence. His behavioral design reflects this. He is simultaneously deeply relieved, deeply sad, and deeply invested in the belief that normal life can and should resume. His emotional arc over the course of the game, if the player spends time with him, is one of the quietest and most affecting in the story. Fact 175. The Pridwin, the Brotherhood of Steel's massive airship that dominates the sky over the Commonwealth for most of the game, is a real feat of environmental design. Its presence is visible from an enormous portion of the map, and the game uses it as a constant visual reminder of the Brotherhood's power and technological advantage over everyone else in the region. Its shadow falling over a location while the player is exploring that location is a deliberately ominous design choice. Fact 176. The Institute's teleportation technology, the molecular relay, is the most advanced piece of technology in Fallout 4's present-day setting. Its existence is kept secret partly because it would be immediately weaponized if known, and partly because the Institute wants to maintain the mystique of appearing to be able to move their agents anywhere at any time without explanation. The first time the player experiences being teleported by it, the sudden dislocation from one environment to another is designed to feel genuinely disorienting. Fact 177. Fallout 4 contains a side quest involving the town of Salem and a specific reference to witch trials. The quest involves a robotic unit that has been programmed with a belief that it has magical powers and which has been terrorizing the local area. The choice of Salem as the location and the specific design of the quest around accusations of witchcraft and the paranoia they generate suggests the developers were making a fairly specific comment about the legacy of the Salem witch trials' particular brand of community violence. Fact 178. The power armor in Fallout 4, works differently from every previous game. In earlier entries, power armor was essentially heavy clothing the player could wear without any particular preparation or equipment. In Fallout 4, power armor is a full suit of exoskeleton that requires a fusion core to operate, is physically separate from the player in the environment when not occupied, and can be found partially assembled, partially deteriorated, and requiring maintenance across the wasteland. This redesign was controversial, but resulted in power armor feeling like a genuinely significant piece of equipment rather than simply a stat upgrade. Fact 179. The Nuka World DLC for Fallout 4, which puts the player in control of a gang of raiders operating from a post-apocalyptic theme park, represents the most direct version of a morally ambiguous playthrough that a Bethesda Fallout game has offered. The player can, in this DLC, forcibly subjugate the settlements of the Commonwealth under raider control. For players who have spent a playthrough building up those settlements, this creates a genuinely uncomfortable emotional dynamic that the DLC appears to have been aware of in its design. The way the game handles this is interesting. It does not stop you, but it also does not pretend there are no consequences. Preston Garvey, the Minutemen leader, will refuse to speak to you if you pursue this path. The settlements you take over lose their carefully cultivated population and resources. The wasteland becomes demonstrably worse as a direct result of your choices in ways that are visible and legible. Nuka World is perhaps the most honest Fallout game has been about the cost of a particular kind of power fantasy. Fact 180. The background audio in some of Fallout 4's smaller-scale locations, including certain caves and ruined buildings, includes echoes and acoustic effects that were specifically designed to make those spaces feel inhabited even when they appear to be empty. The sound design suggests recent activity, dripping water that sounds like it was disturbed, settling sounds that could be structural or could be movement, frequency profiles that remind the human auditory system of breathing spaces. Fallout 4's Commonwealth, for all of the debate it has attracted about dialogue systems and role-playing depth, is one of the most densely realized game worlds ever built. The criticism of it as an RPG is not unfounded, but it sometimes obscures how extraordinary it is as a piece of environmental storytelling. Almost every location in it has a complete story written into its physical layout: who lived there, what they were doing when things went wrong, how they tried to survive, what ultimately happened to them. None of that is told through cutscenes. It is told through where bodies are, which way doors are hanging, what is sitting on which shelf, and what the terminal logs say. It is a narrative form unique to games, and Bethesda is genuinely excellent at it. Section 10. Fallout 76, the TV show, and the Living Legacy Fact 181. Fallout 76's original design directive was for an online multiplayer game without any human NPCs. All other characters in the world were intended to be other players. The game launched in this state, and the resulting experience was described by many players as fundamentally lonely in a way that felt at odds with the series' tradition of companion characters, shopkeepers, quest givers, and reactive storytelling. The game's design director has said in interviews that the intent was to create a world entirely shaped by player agency, where the social structures and the stories were things the players built for themselves rather than things the developers scripted. It is an interesting idea and a legitimate creative direction. It is also, in practice, very different from what most Fallout players were looking for, which is why the reception was as difficult as it was. The Wastelanders update, which added the human NPCs and a full-voiced quest line with significant narrative ambition, represented a genuine course correction, and the community recognized it as such. Fact 182. Bethesda's response to Fallout 76's troubled launch involved a series of substantial updates over the years following release that gradually addressed many of the original criticisms. The Wastelanders update, Steel Dawn, Steel Rain, and the Atlantic City content added human characters, major new quest lines, significant new locations, and a level of narrative substance that brought the game into alignment with what fans expected from a Fallout title. The game's current state is substantially different from what it was at launch. This trajectory is, in a real sense, the most honest demonstration the games industry has produced in recent years of what it looks like when a studio acknowledges that a launch was not good enough and commits to fixing it over years rather than months. Not every studio would do that. Not every game gets the opportunity. The fact that Fallout 76 has a community that remained engaged and patient enough for those improvements to matter is itself a testimony to the depth of affection people have for this particular universe. They wanted it to work. When it started to work, they came back. Fact 183. The Amazon Fallout TV show premiered to strong viewership numbers in April 2024. It was reported as one of Amazon Prime Video's most-watched new shows, and its premiere drove significant traffic back to the games. Fallout 4 peaked at over 250,000 concurrent Steam players in the days following the show's premiere, a remarkable number for a 9-year-old game. The show's success demonstrated that the franchise had the cultural presence to attract an audience beyond its existing fanbase. Fact 184. The TV show's main characters represent 3 distinct entry points into the Fallout world. Lucy is a vault dweller who has known nothing but vault life, experiencing the wasteland for the first time with complete naivety. Maximus is a squire in the Brotherhood of Steel who has grown up in the post-war world and navigated its specific brutalities. The Ghoul is a pre-war human named Cooper Howard who lived through the nuclear exchange and has been surviving in the wasteland for over 200 years, making him a living bridge between the world that existed and the world that remains. Fact 185. Cooper Howard's story in the TV show, told through flashbacks to his pre-war life as a Hollywood actor and family man, adds a specific layer of tragedy to the Fallout universe that the games had never articulated as directly. The experience of someone who was a fully realized person before the bombs fell, who survived because of the same science that destroyed the world, and who has had to develop the psychology of a wasteland survivor while carrying complete memory of everything he has lost. Fact 186. Walton Goggins, who plays the Ghoul in the TV show, described preparing for the role as requiring him to engage with questions about identity, loss, and adaptation that were genuinely philosophically demanding. His performance in the pre-war flashback sequences, where Cooper Howard is warm and idealistic, stands in deliberate contrast to the ruthlessly pragmatic persona the Ghoul has developed over 200 years, and the show carefully manages the relationship between those two selves. Fact 187. The TV show's Vault 33, where Lucy McLean grows up, is designed to represent the closest thing to a functional, genuinely protective vault that the series has shown. It has community, governance, social rituals, and a physical environment that resembles the pre-war world in a way that is meant to be appealing before the show begins systematically dismantling the comforts of that environment. The audience is given time to find the vault charming before understanding why it is a problem. Fact 188. Ella Purnell, who plays Lucy in the TV show, discovered an Easter egg in Fallout 4 that had been hidden in plain sight. A skeleton in a particular location is wearing a vault suit with the number from the vault in the show. She reported this discovery publicly after the show premiered, and the subsequent verification by fans confirmed that Bethesda had placed the reference well before the show's announcement. Fact 189. The Fallout TV show's second season was confirmed before the first season had finished airing, reflecting Amazon's confidence in the show's performance. Season 2 moves the story to New Vegas, the city that many fans consider the emotional and narrative heart of the franchise. This is one of the most anticipated developments in the franchise's history, as New Vegas has not been the setting of a major Fallout game since 2010, and the show represents an opportunity to revisit and expand a location that has extensive existing lore. Fact 190. Ron Perlman returned to the franchise in the TV show's second season as a super mutant character, his first appearance as an on-screen character rather than a narrator. His casting was kept secret until the season released. The character's voice is distinctly recognizable despite the prosthetics and the physical transformation of the super mutant design, and the moment of recognition was widely discussed online following the season's release. Fact 191. Fallout 76's Atlantic City content represents the first major expansion of the Fallout universe to the northeastern United States beyond the capital wasteland. Atlantic City's gambling economy, its boardwalk culture, and its specific New Jersey character gave the game a very different flavor from Appalachia, and the 2 Atlantic City expeditions introduced several new factions and characters who expanded the game's storytelling ambitions considerably. Fact 192. The Fallout Shelter mobile game, released in 2015, the same day as Todd Howard's E3 presentation announcing Fallout 4, was developed in a remarkably compressed time frame by a small internal team at Bethesda. By most accounts, it took only a few months from concept to release. It went on to become one of Bethesda's most commercially successful games by player count, with downloads vastly exceeding the mainline series because of its accessibility as a free mobile title. The game's mechanics, in which the player manages a vault and its population, reverse engineers the Vault-Tec concept. You are now the overseer. You are the one deciding who gets in and who does not, how resources are distributed, what kind of experiments to run. The game never explicitly frames this as sinister, but players who are familiar with the lore can see exactly what they are doing. It is one of the more interesting examples in the series of a game using its genre conventions to make the player inhabit a position they might otherwise be inclined to criticize. Fact 193. Fallout 4's PC modding community has, in the years since the game's 2015 release, produced an enormous body of content extending the game in every conceivable direction. The largest and most ambitious mods include full-scale new games built on the Fallout 4 engine, Fallout, the capital Wasteland, which sought to rebuild Fallout 3 in the Fallout 4 engine before being discontinued due to copyright concerns. Fallout, Miami, which adds the Florida coast as a new playable region, and Fallout, London, a massive DLC-scale addition that moved the game's setting to a post-nuclear United Kingdom, released in 2024 to significant attention. These projects represent thousands of hours of unpaid labor by people who love the franchise enough to want to extend it, and who have the skill to do so in ways that are genuinely comparable to commercial releases. The modding community is, in a very real sense, the ongoing life of the franchise between official releases. Fact 194. Fallout, London, released as a free modification in July 2024, contains approximately 35 hours of new story content, a full new map larger than the base game's Commonwealth, original music, hundreds of voice actors, and an entirely new factional and lore context. It was produced by a team of volunteers over several years. Its release coincided almost exactly with a Fallout 4 next-generation update from Bethesda that temporarily broke mod compatibility, which added an additional logistical challenge to what was already one of the most ambitious fan productions in gaming history. The game sets the Fallout universe in post-nuclear England, which required the mod team to think through how Fallout's specific aesthetic and lore would translate to an entirely different cultural and geographical context. The British Empire, the class system, the particular ruins of London, the specific mythologies of English history, all of it is filtered through Fallout's retro-futuristic lens in ways that are sometimes uncanny and sometimes genuinely original. The fact that it was made at all, and made at that level of quality, is one of the most remarkable demonstrations of what dedicated community effort can produce in a game ecosystem built for modding. Fact 195. The connection between Fallout 4's main story and Fallout 3 is made explicit in a small number of moments. Dr. Madison Lee, who appears in Fallout 3 as a scientist working on Project Purity in the capital Wasteland, appears again in Fallout 4 working for the Institute. The game takes place only 10 years after Fallout 3's events, and Dr. Lee's presence is a quiet bridge between the two stories. Her arc, which involves disillusionment with successive institutions, is one of the more quietly consistent character studies in the series. She joined Project Purity because she believed clean water could save the capital Wasteland. She joined the Institute because she believed their technology could save the world. Both times, she eventually discovered that the institutions she committed to were more interested in their own continuation than in the ideals they had sold her. Her trajectory across 2 games, across a decade of story time, is one of the most honest portrayals the series offers of how genuinely good faith people end up working for organizations that do not deserve them. Fact 196. The history of the Fallout franchise includes 3 games that were begun and never finished. The Fallout MMO, sometimes called Project V13, was developed for years by Interplay after they sold the single-player rights to Bethesda before eventually being canceled due to the extended legal dispute with Bethesda over whether Interplay had met the contractual requirements for development progress. Van Buren, Black Isle's Fallout 3, was cancelled when Black Isle was shut down in 2003, and a Fallout game based in San Francisco, with concept documents that described a game taking place after the events of Fallout 2, existed in early form before the closure of Black Isle made its continuation impossible. Each of these cancelled games represents a version of the Fallout universe that no one will ever see. Game development is full of these shadow histories, projects that generated hundreds of hours of work and thousands of creative decisions before disappearing. The fan community has, over the years, reconstructed substantial portions of Van Buren through its surviving design documents. And what those documents reveal is a game that had a clear, specific identity. It would have been something. Fact 197. The Fallout franchise has, over its entire history, generated more than $1 billion in revenue across all titles. This figure includes sales of the games, in-game purchases in Fallout 76, merchandise, and licensing fees for the TV production. The majority of that revenue has been generated in the Bethesda era, which reflects both the shift toward larger audiences that the 3D, open-world format enabled and the marketing power that Bethesda brought to the franchise. Fact 198. Tim Kaine, the original creator of Fallout, has been running a YouTube channel since 2023 in which he discusses his experiences in game development with notable candor. In these videos, he has addressed questions about Fallout's development, his feelings about what the series became under Bethesda's ownership, and his views on game design philosophy in general. He has said consistently that he is glad Fallout still exists and is still being played, even if some of its later directions are not quite what he would have chosen. The tone of these videos is particular, thoughtful, specific, occasionally nostalgic, and genuinely generous toward a franchise that has gone far beyond anything he could have predicted when he was writing an engine in the margins of his day job at Interplay. He describes the original development period as one of the defining experiences of his life, and the care with which he discusses even its smallest technical details suggests he has thought about it frequently in the decades since. That a person can make something, watch it leave their hands entirely, see it transformed into something he might not have made himself, and still speak about it with warmth and pride rather than resentment is something worth paying attention to. It is, in a small way, its own lesson about what it means to build something worth building. Fact 199. Fallout has been, for virtually its entire existence, a mirror held up to a specific set of anxieties about American identity, American power, and American institutions. The first game was made in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War, when the shadow of nuclear annihilation was lifting, but the institutions that had sustained it were still fully present. Each subsequent game has found the same themes relevant for different reasons. The nuclear anxiety of the original became the anxieties of imperialism in New Vegas, the ethics of artificial life in Fallout 4, and the question of what community even means after catastrophe in Fallout 76. The TV show added another layer, the question of corporate accountability, the story of how the people most responsible for the destruction managed to survive it and potentially resume power over whatever came after. None of these games or seasons is a simple political tract. All of them are genuinely complex enough that people hold sincerely different views about what they are saying. That ambiguity is not a failure of nerve. It is a sophisticated understanding of how the most important questions work. The most interesting questions do not resolve cleanly. They stay with you. They come back in the dark. The Wasteland is good at that. Fact 200, the famous phrase war never changes, means something different each time a player hears it, because each game applies it to a different situation. In the original Fallout, it describes the cycle of violence that destroyed the world and is being recreated in the Wasteland. In New Vegas, it describes the imperial conflicts between the NCR, Caesar's Legion, and every faction fighting over Hoover Dam. In Fallout 4, it describes the personal war of a parent searching for their child across a landscape that has learned nothing from its own destruction. In Fallout 76, it describes the earliest stages of society's rebuilding and the discovery that even from nothing, people find reasons to divide and fight. Ron Perlman has said the same 4 words at the beginning of 5 separate games, and each time, they mean something new. That staying power, that ability to mean everything it needs to mean whenever it is said, is why we are still talking about this series 30 years after it was born, in a conference room at Interplay where 8 people showed up for a pizza party. And there is one more layer to add to that just before we close. Tim Kaine, in his YouTube videos, has talked about how surprised he remains that Fallout became what it became. He went in, by his own account, without a master plan. He had an engine, some ideas, a group of people who thought the ideas were interesting, and a company that was mostly ignoring them. The fact that those conditions produce something people are still playing, still arguing about, still building new worlds inside of in 2025 and beyond, is something he finds genuinely moving. He has said that it is the players who kept it alive, not the studios or the publishers. Every time someone picks up the original game for the first time, every time someone starts a new playthrough of New Vegas with a character build they have been thinking about for weeks, every time someone wanders into a corner of the Commonwealth and discovers a skeleton and a terminal and a story that nobody told them to find, those moments are why the Wasteland is still standing. The world of Fallout is one of the most detailed, most internally consistent, and most philosophically ambitious worlds that video games have produced. It asks serious questions with serious consequences, and it trusts the people walking through it to take those questions seriously too. It is a game series that believes its players are capable of more than most entertainment gives them credit for. That respect, built into its design from the very beginning by the people who made it, is probably the deepest reason it has lasted. Take care of yourselves. The Wasteland will be here whenever you want to come back. And that is all 200. We started at a pizza party in 1994 and ended up in a nuclear wasteland that has somehow never stopped being relevant. Whether you made it through all of this in one go, or you let it carry you somewhere quiet tonight, thank you for spending this time here. If something in these 200 facts made you think, or reminded you of a detail you had forgotten, or sent you back to the Wasteland, drop it in the comments. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. Tell me what time it is. I always want to know. And if you found this worth your time, a subscription means the next long one finds you too. There is always more to explore. The Wasteland is big. Take care of yourselves out there. Good night.